Yeah, there's a good quote here from Ivan Macbeth, who's been one of my instructors. I also trained in labyrinths with Sig Lonergan. The tutors have been Patrick McManaway was my main Geomancy one. I've also worked with Marty Kane, who's a great geomancer builder. I learned about labyrinths when I was in school, actually, when somebody showed me how to draw the seed pattern. And how common must that be? I'm sure this is how the labyrinth spread. Somebody said, hey, look at this neat bit of drawing here. Off you go and, make these labyrinths. But Ivan Macbeth said, it is vitally important for human-made structures to honor and make connections with the physical environment, create stability, acceptance by the spirit of the land, and very real anchor lines, which are now energy flows between the structure and the surrounding landscape. So that's really where the geomancy comes into it. And dowsing and labyrinths go hand in hand, really. Most dowsers who work with labyrinths really appreciate how they can transform the energies of the land. This picture we're looking at here actually is my most recent labyrinth, which I did just at the end of lockdown. And we'll get into that a bit later on. So Western geomancy has a sort of three-legged stool. There's three prongs of approach, really. So we have earth energies, which is where the dowsing comes in. We have sacred geometry. We have to know about this to create structures that help enhance the resonance of spaces. And astronomy, astrology, they used to be the same thing many years ago. It's important to be able to connect the structure of the labyrinth with the heavens as well. So all sacred spaces incorporate these three elements. So in dowsing, we're looking at power centers, and a power center is what we call a blind spring in Britain. In the States, you call it a water dome usually. This is where you have a rising water source that's not getting to the surface. So in a plan view, it looks like this. Let me turn my pointer on here. Plan view looks like this, sort of spider web, spokes of a wheel kind of thing. If you look at it from the side, you have water rising up and it's not getting to the surface. Maybe there's a layer of clay or a layer of rock or something. So it spreads out in all these little levels. This is where you find lays come in and leave the planet. If you think three-dimensionally, think of these like a big arch coming in or coming out of a blind spring. So these are the power centers that energize the Earth's energy matrix. And labyrinths attract these power centers. Dowsers have been finding this for some years now, that if you make a labyrinth, even a temporary one, and you walk it regularly, even for just a few days, it starts to develop this power signature where you can douse a blind spring and you can douse the energy lays. It's quite a peculiar thing, but it's been noted by dowsers many, many times. Other aspects of dowsing that we can take into, there's all sorts of earth energy manifestations that dowsers get interested in, such as the dragon lines, the serpent lines. This is the Michael line across southern England, and has these male and female dragon lines that weave around it, like a caduceus around a staff. These dowsers, male, female, yin and yang, and this is all part of the Earth's energy matrix. And where these lines cross, you have a node point, which is an actual power center. Other things we get into, we find geospirals over power centers. We can get into looking at earth grids. There are grids called the Hartmann, the Curry, the Benker grids, and the most common. I'm not going to get too into these because this is pretty advanced stuff. In the sacred geometry, all sites from stone rings to cathedrals have some form of geometry inherent in the design. Particularly, this is the way they will include irrational numbers like pi and phi. And these are fractional numbers. They're not numbers with more of a quality rather than a quantity in the olden days. So, for example, you probably know that pi, the number of the decimal, goes on forever. It's 3.141618 ... on into infinity, and it never repeats itself. That's an irrational number. So these numbers, when they're created in a space, it's a kind of a way of acknowledging the infinite, if you like. So it kind of gets us closer to deity, gets us closer to the source. This sort of geometry sets up a natural resonance in the structure. We find it in the natural world. Here's a Romanesque broccoli. And this sort of pedigree goes back a long, long way. Even you think back to the Bible and the Judaic tradition, Moses was told to make a holy tabernacle according to the measurements he'd been shown by God on Mount Sinai. And then you have the Temple of Solomon, which whose proportions were given to King David by God, by Yahweh. Even in the universe, in the macroscopic, we can find sacred geometry. For example, the orbital distances of the planets in the solar system is determined by the Fibonacci sequence, which is the golden ratio. So everything is made of numbers. It's all about frequency and the vibration. It's all about the quality of these numbers. Without geometry, ideas, archetypes, and sacred concepts cannot be transferred into two-dimensional space. So a couple of good examples here. I don't know what one on the right is. I think it's some synagogue in Israel or something. This one on the left is Cosmati pavement in Westminster Abbey. This is what King Charles was crowned on. The throne sat right in the central circle here. And this is a really interesting pattern to print out and just hold your pendulum over each of these circles to see what happens with it. You do get some quite interesting things happening. So you can imagine this is the confluence of several ley lines all crossing right through here. So that's a major power center. Geometry, of course, is inherent in the medieval labyrinth, the sharp replica. I'm sure you're probably all aware of this. That, you know, the diameter d, a quarter of the diameter determines the central circle. If you diameter of the central circle as 1 unit, then the remaining diameter labyrinth is 1.618, which is 5, the golden ratio. D is equal to 20 times the width of the path. The center is equal to 7 times the width of the path. Lunations are equal to the width of the path. There's 112 lunations. That's the little coggy bits around the outside, which is equivalent to 4 lunar months. So all sorts of geometry are in the shark labyrinth, but not in the classical labyrinth. You know, like a classical Troy labyrinth, you can draw just from a seed pattern. You need the geometry. Astronomy, we're interested in astronomy because we like to incorporate some alignments to an astronomical event. This picture is Glastonbury Tor. This is the sunset happening at beginning of February, which is Candlemas. So this is down the Michael line that you saw earlier. And that's the sunset on the Michael line. Here's an example from Glasgow. This is the Sight Hill megalith, the Sight Hill stone circle, which was actually built in 1979 by a local astronomer, Duncan Lunan. And it was recently removed from the site because they were redeveloping the area. And it's been rebuilt again about a few hundred yards away. It's still in the same area. So here's a picture of the new site as done. And Duncan, back in 1979, built all these astronomical alignments into it, including the summer solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunset, and he had lunar standstills and standstills as well. However, back in 1979, he didn't have the computer power to do it, so it was all worked out on paper, and some of the things were not quite as accurate as they should be, shall we say. So this time around, he had the opportunity with modern technology to hopefully get everything right. And I was actually up there at the summer solstice to see the sunrise. So let me just show this little video. If I can get this to start. There we go. Is that going? Here we go. This is the time lapse. So the central stone here is the one that marks the solstice sunrise. So pretty good. I'm sure you'll agree. Duncan was delighted with it when I sent it. Although this tree has definitely got to go. So doing this, creating all these links with the earth energies and with the heavens above, you know, it does create these long distance links in the landscape, what you call lays, if you like. You get these very energetic ties developing. This is an example of Glastonbury, showing some of the lays that converge on the Tor in the middle here. So moving on to labyrinths in particular, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Theseus Minotaur story. Some people have theorized that the labyrinth, which is the axe symbol, where we get the word labyrinth from, which is found extensively in Knossos on the Isle of Crete. Some people theorize that this is actually based on an astronomical observation device. If we look at this, the wheel of the year, so here we have the summer solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunrise, and the sunsets over here. So right now we're at here, this is Beltane Lugmasa, or Candlemas Lamas. The sunrise is happening. The axe can be superimposed on this just to indicate these directions. This is from Sig Lodegren's book, Labyrinths, Ancient Myths and Modern Uses. So you can see it could be a crude means of working out these angles. And some people have interpreted the carvings on Knossos here as showing this. So like this one's pointed to the winter solstice sunrise, this one's pointed to the midsummer sunrise. So, it's a theory. So how do we do this? How do we create these astronomical alignments in our sites? Well, the first thing we have to do is establish the direction of true north, which is a little geomantic act called drawing down the north that we perform. If in the northern hemisphere, you can always find the North Star by looking at the Big Dipper, as you guys call it, or the plough, as we call it in Britain. This is the compolar constellation, and it always is visible above the horizon in the northern hemisphere. And the two stars at the end of the Dipper here always point towards Polaris, the North Star. And if you check, the whole sky will revolve around this. In our time, our age, it didn't always do this, but we're lucky enough that it does just now. So what we do is we establish the center of our site here by dowsing. We hold our pendulum on a long string or plumb line over this point, and you can either have somebody else here with another one, just so you can get them both aligned, or more commonly, you have a couple of people standing around there and just moving your hand to make sure it's always over that point. So you then sight through the string up at the pole star and get those two in alignment. Meanwhile, the other chap gets a sighting pole, and you tell him to move it left or right until that is also in line with your string. So you're looking through your string of your pendulum, through the pole, the staff up at the pole star. And when that's all in alignment, then you can mark this point here, and drawing the line between the two will give you your north-south axis. So that's true north. This is more accurate than using a compass or your phone. Phone compasses are notoriously inaccurate. And in a compass, you usually need to correct for magnetic declination. Although at the moment in Britain, all norths are north, like magnetic north, grid north, and true north are all the same, because the magnetic North Pole is actually moving at a rate of knots. It's moving eastwards quite rapidly. So for the next couple of years, you don't need to adjust your compass in Britain. Other means you can do this, you can use a GPS device, but to get a GPS baseline, you need quite a long baseline. So you need a good couple of 100 yards or so to take 2 points, and then you have to work out what the alignment is. And this is all, it lacks finesse. It's not as spectacular or as magical, if you like, as doing the whole drawing down the north ritual. And it becomes a whole ceremony. It is a whole ritual. So there's other means of doing it. You can do it in the day with marking the shadow of the sun. But doing it at night on a clear night sky there's just something magical about that. So we've got our north-south axis. How do we get our east-west axis? Well, for that we use a Druid's chord. This is a chord that has 13 equal divisions, so you have 14 knots in it, and you can use this to form a 3-4-5 Pythagorean right-angled triangle, like you see in the animation here. And here it is being put to use. So here's our center for the labyrinth, here's our north and south, and here I'm using this to mark out the east-west line. So we have established our 4 cardinal directions. So once we have that, we can then start to look at any other alignments we want to include. For example, there might be a significant sunset or sunrise, or a moonset or moonrise. One of the things I like to do is try and align it to, say, the sunrise or sunset on the client's birthday. That's a really nice personal thing to do for a Labyrinth client. Or you can work with them to ask, which particular day is significant, and try and work that in. So a couple of other fun things with Labyrinths and the sky here. You may know this one. Labyrinths are associated with Mercury, because Mercury, in its course of its orbit, appears to go backwards or retrograde 3 times and 4 times forward. And you probably all know that when Mercury is retrograde, then communications tend to go a bit awry. Things don't tend to happen too well, and your computer breaks down and stuff, because Mercury, being the messenger of communication, does have an effect on things. But the labyrinth also has this strange symmetry. We have 3 retrograde paths going backwards, and we have 4 forward paths going in. So that's an interesting correspondence there. Very quickly, another one is magic squares. These are these mathematical curiosities where if you add up each row across or vertically or diagonally, they all add to the same number. So the square for Saturn, for example, everything adds to 15, Jupiter 34, Mars 65, and so on. Luna is of interest, which adds to 369, the one for the moon. But strange things happen if you start to color in the odd or the even numbers here. So like particularly you'll recognize these, I'm sure, particularly this one. So yeah,
pattern.
This is the seed pattern for the 7th Circuit classical labyrinth. Just like that. So, okay, moving on to actually placing a labyrinth. One of the things I haven't mentioned yet is the spirit of place. It's very important with our dowsing that we establish a connection with the spirit of place. Now, this can either, it can be an etheric guardian spirit if it's a sacred site. It can just be a sense of, what draws you in the space, what's the important part that you need to dialogue with. And with your pendulum, we would get into a dialogue with the spirit of place. Can I make contact with this? Are you happy if I build a labyrinth here? There's all sorts of questions you can get into a dialogue with using your pendulum. It's that sort of liminal quality, that is celebrated by artists and folklore throughout the years. The Romans actually used to say it was a specific spirit, and they tended to personify it as a snake. But sometimes it's just a feeling, or with their dowsing rod, you can actually say, where is the spot? Where do I need to stand to get in touch with the spirit of place? So this is one I did many years ago. This is for the BSD's 75th anniversary conference, where I built this in chakra colors using florist ribbon. And we had dowsed, there was an interesting lay and a water line coming through here. And the only spirit of place I could find in this courtyard, which was surrounded by buildings, was this rather magnificent tree at the back. This photograph doesn't really do justice to it, but it was a really grandiose tree. So, we went up and, we touched the tree, we made some offerings, got into dialogue with it and asked if we had picked the right spot for the labyrinth. Was it okay? Would it help us build it? And yeah, and so we did. It took about 2 hours to build this. It was a very successful one. So in dowsing for the labyrinths, we need to find our power center. So, these characteristics of these power centers, you find them in cathedrals, pre-Reformation churches, stone circles, and labyrinths. So first of all, we dowse for a blind spring. So a normal spring is where you have water rising up from deep in the ground, and it's being forced up under pressure through various strata of rock. And in a blind spring, as we saw earlier, maybe it's not getting to the surface for some reason. Maybe there's a layer of clay or just impervious rock. So it's hitting something and then it's spreading out. So dowsers look for this, and we call this juvenile water because it's thought that it's not part of the rainfall cycle. It's water that's actually formed under very high pressure deep within the earth. And only very recently, scientists have found this water in the Earth's mantle. It's water that's in its component parts. It's in a sort of, plasma state, if you like. It's in this mineral called ringwoodite. So when that forms under pressure and is forced upwards, it then forms, this primary water, which comes to the surface. So when you're dowsing this in a labyrinth, you might get something like this. So the circle here, you can see this is the edge of the water dome or the edge of the blind spring. And just walking out from the center, you can ask for this and you'll get a reaction here. And I like then to walk around and show me where the water lines are coming off or flowing in. Normally you'll find one coming in that's feeding the spring. And then you'll have these energy lays, which may start or finish here, or they may just be crossing through. And again, remember, I said these tend to be 3-dimensional. So you have to think of them like coming out, in arches and spreading out around the area. So labyrinths seem to attract this energy pattern. Even if there's nothing there, you'll certainly be able to douse this water pattern after a few days of walking. And here's a case study that I'll tell you about where this actually happened with me. This is the Edinburgh Labyrinth, built by the Edinburgh Chaplaincy in Edinburgh University. And they used to have a canvas labyrinth, which they would walk every month at least. And the chaplain, Di Williams, at the time was a Veriditas-trained labyrinth facilitator, and she managed to raise funds to get a permanent medieval sharp replica one built. And they asked me to come and douse the site to see where was the best spot for it. So this is the gardens here, George Square Gardens. As you can see, it's surrounded on 4 sides by university buildings. And this stuff in the middle here is the Spiegel tent that they put up for the Edinburgh Festival. In fact, that's taken over about most of the rest of the gardens these days. So I doused this spot down here as being a good spot for the labyrinth. There was a nice lay running through this direction, and there's some water lines and a little blind spring. It wasn't very strong, but it was definitely there. However, the architect didn't think it was level enough, that it's going to require too much groundwork. So he asked if I could find another spot for it in the other quarter. So I had to move it around here. And here I had doused again. And now I knew there was a lay running through from the hills at the back of Glasgow through to Arthur's Seat, which is the big volcanic plug in the centre of Edinburgh. I knew there was a line running there. So I doused to try and find that line. And that was what I was going to site the labyrinth on. One of the first things I do when I'm creating a site like this is I try and take a panorama and work out, what astronomical alignments can I get. So here's a panorama. This is kind of 2.5 sides of the square, if you like. And again, buildings all the way around, apart from this corner here. And you can just see a hill at the back here. That's the Pentland Hills outside of Edinburgh. And I calculated that the winter solstice sunset, the sun would roll down this hill and set into the notch just at the side of the building there. Well, perfect, that'll do. So I marked that out with the architect present, and we put stakes in and some string. And here's the energy lay that I had doused. The blind spring was not here. The blind spring was over by the central garden bit, but I figured that it would work its way over to the labyrinth eventually. However, as it turned out, some enterprising students came along and didn't like the wooden stakes that we'd left in the grass and took them away. And the architect said he couldn't find this drawing when he came to lay it out. So that was his excuse. So he just laid it out north and south, which is a fairly good default direction if you can't think of anything better to do, I guess. So anyway, once we built the labyrinth, here was the opening ceremony. I was marking these lays that I discovered earlier that I knew about in Google Earth. This is the one that runs to Arthur's Seat. And when I plotted it in here, it ran right through the centre of the labyrinth. So I was absolutely delighted with that. So that's one example of geomancy and spirit of place, putting you in the right situation. And here's a picture of the finished labyrinth.
Beautiful.
Here's another one. This is an early client's one of mine. And this is a 3-circuit Hecate, or Chakravure, done in crushed slate and gravel. Although we actually replaced the gravel with more crushed slate because it's hard to walk on gravel. And the alignment here, this stone here is the north, and these stones running across the labyrinth, getting progressively higher to over the fence here. That indicated the sunset on the client's birthday. And we did the labyrinth, we finished the labyrinth and did the opening ceremony on her birthday. So that was a really nice way. The sun set just as we finished building it. Also over in the corner here, she wanted this garden altar, and I made this little armillary dome out of some copper tubing. So this points at the North Star, and this outer ring here marks the path of the sun at the equinoxes, and the inner ring marks the path of the sun at the summer solstice. So just a little artistic flourish, if you like.
Graham, this is Carmel. I was wondering if we could wrap up in about 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, yep, we will be. Okay, here's another one. This is one again, I didn't have much leeway in terms of viewpoints, so I aligned it to the north, which is over here. That's the only bit we could see that wasn't surrounded by hills. And there was the opening ceremony there. You see we've got some interesting orb action happening. And the next morning, we had some more orb action happening. So that's quite a nice one. They had to redo the log recently with more stones. So the last one, second last one. This is one I did in Mandali. Mandali is a retreat center in northern Italy, just by Lago d'Orta, which is the smallest of the Italian lakes here. And they wanted, I did this labyrinth design for them. They have this flower of life as their logo. So I thought it'd be really nice to try and incorporate that into a labyrinth. And also because they have large groups, they wanted something that had a continuous loop, so you didn't have to walk back out through the labyrinth. So I had this one with the fast getaway. So you went in here, you walked around it, you came out into the center, and then it was natural to walk back around and go in again. So I asked them if they could find a stone here. I thought by opening up the labyrinth like this, it'd be really nice to create a focal point and a stone that you could sit on. And they managed to find me this millstone. So here was the stone, and this is my finished construction drawing. So the center is the same size as the stone. And geometry was involved in this one, obviously. So here we did a markup on the beach in Scotland where I went. Here's the markup on the site. So you can see the alignment through the center here. At the back here, you can see the statue of the Virgin Mary, which they were choosing as their patron saint, if you like. That was quite significant to the whole center. So I aligned it on that. Just in front of her is a path that goes down the hill to the lake and the village. We'll get back to that later. So here we are putting in the stone. You can see it's quite a monster millstone. Some final adjustments there. And here's starting to construct the walls. And here's some of the alignments I was looking at. This is the February the 1st, November the 1st. And this was the equinox sunset, which I was delighted to find when I worked this out later, happened over the spire of the church in the village. That was exactly where the equinox sunset occurred. Here it's finishing touches, some blue slate on the paths. I find this really nice to walk on, even bare feet. It's such a nice rock. And here's the finished pattern with the stone in place. And here's the shot from above, the drone shot with people walking it. Now, all the time we've been building this, we were in the retreat center. We had no idea what was happening outside. So we had a couple of days afterwards, and they took us out for a walk around the local village. And up behind the local village here, there's this little, I'm calling it a hill fort. I don't really know what it was. It had 3 banks and ditches. So this little oppidum, if you like, up in the hill. And then the next day we went down the hill past the Mary statue, and halfway down the hill here, there's stations of the cross all the way down, and there's this little Mary chapel. And I plotted both of these on the GPS on my phone, and when I get back and draw it in Google Earth, isn't the labyrinth right bang on the line there, which was actually the line I had dowsed when I was sighting the labyrinth. So, yeah, you're definitely in tune with the land here. Last one, just quickly go through this one. This is one you saw at the beginning. This will happen mostly through lockdown. It took a couple of years to get this one together, and I went through about 5 or 6 different iterations of the design here. It was going to be a 7-circuit originally, and then they had not cleared enough space in the trees for a 7-circuit. So I thought, well, we're going to go with a 5 circuits. Then they decided they wanted it wheelchair accessible. So that, okay, it's going to have to be a 3-circuit, and it's going to have a quick exit again. So just by playing around with the pattern, I got this one where I just twisted the center around. So you had this quick escape route. And I wanted to put in this choice at the beginning. So you have to make a choice on the path coming in, which way you're going to go. So you can have the quick route and you can have the long route. And so you don't have to go back on yourself. You can just carry on each way. So that was it. There it was as we finished it. It's now got flowers planted all the way around it and along the walls, so it's much prettier than this. This is a bit bare. But yeah, that's there we go.
That's a great ending. Oh my goodness, that's just absolutely fabulous. Your presentation was top notch, beautiful.